The doors of the clinic burst open, and 3 men rushed in carrying a 4th man between them. Claire Bennett dropped the folder she was holding and ran forward before her mind had even caught up with her body. It was almost midnight, and she was the only nurse left on duty. The regular doctor had gone home hours earlier, and the small downtown clinic was nearly empty, except for the hum of the old air conditioner and the flicker of a single overhead light. The man being carried in was pale, his shirt soaked through, his eyes half open. The men around him were tense, their eyes scanning every corner of the room like they expected danger to follow them through the door. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, looked at Claire and said one sentence that made her blood freeze. "Fix him. Now. No hospital. No police. No questions." Claire had spent 3 years working in emergency rooms. She had seen car accidents, falls, sudden collapses, but she had never had a stranger point a commanding voice at her like that. Never had men standing over her shoulder like silent statues, waiting to see if she would fail. Her hands trembled for 1 second, then steadied. She had learned long ago that fear does nothing when someone's life depends on your hands staying calm. "Put him on the table," she said, surprising herself with how firm her voice sounded. "Now. And someone needs to hold the light steady." The men obeyed her without hesitation, which struck her as strange. Men like this, men who carried themselves like they were used to giving orders, were now following hers. She didn't have time to think about why. She cut away the fabric of his shirt, cleaned the area as fast as she could, and began working. Her mind blocked out everything else, the tension in the room, the men standing like guards at every exit, the sound of her own heartbeat. All that mattered was keeping this man breathing. He opened his eyes once during the process, and for a brief moment, his gaze locked with hers. There was no fear in his eyes, only a strange kind of focus, as if he were studying her the same way she was studying his wound. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The look was enough to tell her this was not an ordinary night, and he was not an ordinary patient. Claire worked through the pain response, monitored his pulse, and kept pressure steady until the bleeding slowed. Sweat gathered at her temple, but she didn't stop to wipe it away. Minutes passed like hours. She was aware of every set of eyes in the room, watching her every movement, waiting, judging, ready to react if she made even the smallest mistake. Finally, after what felt like forever, his breathing steadied. His pulse became stronger. Claire allowed herself one long breath before continuing to stabilize him properly. When she finished, she stepped back, her hands finally shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "He'll live," she said quietly, "but he needs rest. Real rest. And he needs to see a proper doctor within the next day, someone who can check for infection." The tall man studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. He didn't thank her. He simply turned to the others and said, "Get him to the car." As they lifted him, the injured man's eyes opened one final time. He looked at Claire again, this time with something unreadable behind his gaze. Whatever it was, it left a strange, uneasy feeling in her chest, a feeling she couldn't explain and didn't want to examine too closely. Before they left, the tall man turned back to her. He placed an envelope on the counter beside her, thick and heavy with cash, though she hadn't asked for anything. "You didn't see this," he said. "You didn't treat anyone tonight. Understand?" Claire nodded slowly, though her mind was racing with 100 questions she knew better than to ask. The men disappeared through the door as quickly as they had come, leaving her standing alone in the empty clinic, the smell of antiseptic and fear still hanging in the air. She sat down on the small stool beside the exam table, staring at the envelope she hadn't touched. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear this time, but from the sheer intensity of what had just happened. She thought about calling the police, but something told her that would be a mistake, maybe even a dangerous one. She thought about the man's eyes, calm even while his life was slipping away, and she wondered what kind of person could stay so composed under that kind of pressure. She didn't sleep that night. She kept replaying every second in her mind, the urgency in the men's voices, the strange calm on the injured man's face, the way the room had gone utterly silent whenever she spoke. It felt like she had stepped, however briefly, into a world completely different from her own, a world with different rules, different dangers, and people who lived by codes she couldn't begin to understand. By morning, she told herself it was over. Whatever had happened, whoever those men were, they were gone now, and her life would go back to normal. She went to work the next day, as if nothing had changed, treating patients with colds and sprained ankles, filling out charts, drinking too much coffee to make up for her lack of sleep. She almost convinced herself the night before had been some strange dream brought on by exhaustion. But deep down, she knew it wasn't a dream. The envelope sitting untouched in her bag reminded her every time she reached for her keys. She didn't spend a cent of it. She didn't know what to do with money that felt more like a warning than a gift. Days passed, then weeks. Claire began to relax, convincing herself that whatever world those men belonged to had nothing more to do with her. She had done her job, saved a life, and that was where her involvement ended. She focused on her patients, on her mother's health, on the same routine she had followed for years. Then one evening, as she left work and walked toward the bus stop near her apartment, a black car pulled up beside her, moving slow and deliberate, like it had been waiting for her the entire time. The window rolled down, revealing a face she didn't recognize, but a voice that carried the same quiet authority she remembered from that night. "Miss Bennett," the man said, "someone would like to speak with you." Claire's heart began to pound. She thought about running, about screaming for help, but something about the calm, almost respectful tone of his voice made her pause. She looked around at the quiet street, empty except for a few passing cars, and realized she had no idea what kind of situation she had just been pulled into. "I have somewhere to be," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "This won't take long," the man replied, "and it isn't a request." The words hung in the air, polite but unmistakably firm. Claire felt her stomach twist into knots. She thought about the envelope she had never touched, still sitting in a drawer at home, untouched proof that whatever had happened that night was far from over. She thought about the man on the table, his calm eyes locking onto hers even as his life hung by a thread. Slowly, she stepped toward the car, unsure if she was making the right choice, but somehow certain that refusing wasn't really an option. As she settled into the back seat, the door closing behind her with a soft, final click, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The city lights blurred past the window as the car pulled away, carrying her toward a place she had never seen, and toward a man whose eyes she hadn't been able to forget. She didn't know it yet, but the moment she stepped into that car, the ordinary life she had spent years building quietly began to unravel, thread by thread, and there would be no simple way back. The car ride felt longer than it probably was. Claire sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the city change around her. The busy streets near her apartment gave way to quieter roads, then to a long stretch lined with tall trees and iron gates. She had never been to this part of the city before, and the silence inside the car only made her more aware of how far she was traveling from anything familiar. The driver said nothing the entire ride, and Claire didn't try to make conversation. Her mind was too busy running through every possible reason she might have been brought here. Was the man from the clinic angry with her? Had something gone wrong with his recovery? Did they think she had told someone what happened? Each new thought made her chest tighten a little more. Finally, the car slowed and turned through a set of large gates that opened automatically, as if someone inside had been watching for their arrival. Claire caught her breath at the sight of the property in front of her. A large stone house surrounded by manicured gardens, more like something from a magazine than a real place someone actually lived. The driver parked and opened her door, gesturing for her to step out. Claire hesitated only a moment before following him toward the front entrance, her heart pounding with every step. Guards stood near the doorway, watching her with the same careful, assessing eyes she remembered from the clinic. No one spoke to her. No one needed to. Their presence alone told her everything about how seriously this place took its own security. Inside, the house was quiet, elegant, and strangely cold despite its beauty. She was led down a long hallway toward a set of double doors, behind which she could hear low voices speaking in hushed, serious tones. When the doors opened, the conversation stopped instantly, and every eye in the room turned toward her. It was a large dining room, though no one was eating. Several men sat around a long table, all dressed in dark, expensive clothing, all watching her with an intensity that made her want to shrink into herself. At the head of the table sat the man from the clinic, the one whose life she had fought to save. He looked different now, stronger, more composed, dressed in a way that made it clear he was someone of importance, but his eyes were the same, sharp and unreadable, studying her the moment she walked through the door. The room fell into complete silence. Claire stood frozen at the entrance, unsure whether to speak or wait to be addressed. The tension in the air was thick enough to feel against her skin. Then the man at the head of the table spoke, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "Bring me that woman." For a moment, confusion rippled through the room. Claire was standing right there, already brought before him, and yet his words suggested something more than her simple presence. The men around the table exchanged uncertain glances, unsure exactly what he meant, unsure how to respond to an order that seemed to already be fulfilled. Claire felt her pulse quicken, unsure if she should step forward or stay exactly where she was. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until the man finally rose from his seat and walked slowly toward her, his steps deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. "You saved my life," he said, his voice quieter now, meant only for her, though everyone in the room could hear. "Do you understand what that means in my world?" Claire shook her head slowly, unable to find her voice. "It means I owe you something no amount of money can repay," he continued. "And it means you are no longer a stranger to me." Claire's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying, trying to understand what kind of world she had stumbled into, and what role she was now expected to play in it. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. All she could do was stand there, held captive by the intensity of his gaze, aware that whatever happened next would change the course of her life forever. "My name is Adrian Cole," he said, still standing close enough that she could hear the steadiness in his breathing, the same steadiness she had fought so hard to give him that night. "You already know what I do, even if no one has said it out loud. I think it's time someone did." Claire swallowed hard. "I don't need to know," she said. "I did my job. That's all that happened." A faint, almost amused expression crossed his face. "That is rarely all that happens," he said. "Not in my world." He gestured toward an empty chair near the head of the table, and though every instinct told her to refuse, to turn around and walk straight back out through those double doors, something about the quiet authority in his voice made her legs carry her forward instead. She sat down carefully, aware of every eye still fixed on her. "I have doctors," Adrian said, taking his own seat again. "Expensive ones. Loyal, on paper. But loyalty bought with money is never loyalty at all. It is simply a price waiting for someone else to pay a higher one." He paused, studying her carefully. "You had no idea who I was that night. You had no reason to help me, and every reason to refuse. And yet you didn't hesitate." "I couldn't let someone die in front of me," Claire said quietly. "That has nothing to do with who you are." "Exactly," Adrian replied, leaning forward slightly. "That is precisely why I trust you." Marcus, the tall man who had carried Adrian into the clinic that night, shifted uncomfortably near the wall. Claire could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked toward Adrian, as though silently questioning the direction of the conversation. Whatever was happening in this room was clearly unusual, even to the people who worked closest to Adrian every day. "I want you as my personal physician," Adrian said, his words landing in the silence like a stone dropped into still water. "Someone I can call, day or night, without worrying about betrayal, without worrying about information leaving this house." Claire's breath caught in her throat. She had expected many things when she stepped into that car, but not this. "I'm a nurse," she said carefully. "Not a doctor, and I already have a job, a life." "I am aware," Adrian said. "I am also aware you are more capable than most doctors I have paid a great deal of money to keep quiet. I am offering you a position that would change your life financially, permanently. Your mother's medical bills, the ones weighing on you every single month, would no longer be a concern." Claire's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't told anyone about her mother's illness, not her co-workers, not her closest friends. The fact that he knew sent a cold shiver down her spine. "How do you know about my mother?" she asked, her voice sharper now, edged with fear rather than curiosity. "I know many things," Adrian said simply. "It is how I survive. I am not telling you this to frighten you. I am telling you because I want you to understand that I am serious about this offer, and that I already understand the pressures in your life better than most people who claim to care about you." Claire sat in silence, her mind spinning with the weight of everything unfolding around her. Every rational part of her screamed to refuse, to walk away from this world before it swallowed her whole. But another part of her, quieter and more practical, thought about the endless stack of medical bills sitting on her kitchen counter. about the tired look on her mother's face every time she apologized for being a burden she never chose to be. "I need time to think," Claire finally said. Adrian nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her hesitation. "Take the time you need," he said. "But understand this. The offer will not stay open forever, and once you decide, there will be no undoing that decision." Marcus escorted her back to the car in silence, and the ride home felt even longer than the ride there. Claire stared out the window, watching the wealthy estates fade back into the familiar streets of her own neighborhood, streets that suddenly felt smaller, more limited, than they had before. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of unpaid bills, the numbers blurring together as exhaustion and stress pressed down on her. Her mother's treatment required specialists, medication, constant monitoring, all of it costing more than Claire's salary could ever reasonably cover. She had been quietly drowning for months, smiling through it, pretending everything was manageable when it wasn't. She thought about Adrian's calm, steady voice, the way he had studied her without judgment, without the kind of predatory intent she might have expected from a man in his position. She thought about the danger that surrounded him, the guns, the secrecy, the world of violence she knew existed just beneath the surface of every conversation in that house. And yet, she also thought about the way the room had gone completely silent the moment he addressed her, as though her presence alone commanded a strange kind of respect she had never experienced in her ordinary life. Days passed as Claire wrestled with the decision. She visited her mother, watched her struggle through another difficult week, watched the worry in her eyes whenever the subject of money came up. Claire smiled and reassured her, the same way she always did, though inside she felt the walls of her old life closing in tighter with every passing day. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks of restless nights and endless calculations, Claire called the number Marcus had given her. Her voice was steady when she spoke, though her heart pounded so loudly she was certain the person on the other end could hear it. "I'll do it," she said, "but I have conditions." There was a brief pause before Marcus responded. "Mr. Cole expected as much," he said. "He'll want to hear them from you directly." 2 days later, Claire found herself back in the same grand house, though this time the atmosphere felt different, quieter, more private. Adrian met her alone in a smaller room, one lined with books and a large window overlooking the gardens outside. He gestured for her to sit, and this time, she did so without hesitation. "I'm listening," he said, folding his hands together as he studied her. "I treat you when you're injured," Claire began, her voice firm despite the nervous energy running through her. "I don't get involved in anything else. I don't know details about your business. I don't participate in anything illegal, and I keep my life outside of this house completely separate." Adrian considered her words carefully before nodding. "Reasonable," he said. "Though I should warn you, the line between my world and yours may not stay as clean as you hope." "I'll take that risk," Claire replied. "Very well," Adrian said. "Then we have an agreement." As she stood to leave, Adrian spoke again, his voice quieter this time, almost thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" Claire paused, turning back toward him. "That night at the clinic," he said, "you didn't know who I was. You didn't know what would happen if you failed. And yet you worked as though my life mattered more than your own safety. Why?" Claire considered the question carefully before answering. "Because it did," she said simply. "In that moment, nothing else mattered except keeping you alive. That's the job. That's always been the job." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, something Claire couldn't quite name, a flicker of genuine surprise, perhaps even respect. He said nothing more, simply nodded once, and let her go. Over the following weeks, Claire's new arrangement settled into an uneasy rhythm. She visited the estate several times, checking on minor injuries Adrian sustained in the course of his work. Injuries he never fully explained and she never fully asked about. Their conversations remained professional at first, brief and businesslike, though Claire couldn't deny the curiosity that grew every time she stepped into that world so different from her own. She noticed things about Adrian that surprised her, the careful way he treated the people who worked for him, the quiet respect he commanded without ever raising his voice, the flashes of exhaustion he tried to hide whenever he thought no one was watching. He was not the simple, cold figure she had expected. He was complicated, guarded, someone who carried the weight of countless decisions most people would never have to make. One evening, after treating a minor injury to his hand, Claire found herself lingering longer than necessary, drawn into a conversation about something as ordinary as the books lining his study walls. Adrian spoke about them with a passion that felt entirely disconnected from the dangerous world he lived in, revealing a side of himself few people ever saw. "You don't seem like someone who reads philosophy," Claire admitted, glancing at the worn spine of a book on his desk. "Most people expect very little depth from someone in my position," Adrian replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "It makes it easier to underestimate me. I've learned to use that." Claire studied him for a long moment, seeing not just the powerful, controlled figure everyone else seemed to fear, but a man shaped by circumstances far beyond his control, someone who had built walls so high that few people ever saw past them. And yet, somehow, in these quiet moments, those walls seemed just a little lower whenever she was near. She told herself these conversations meant nothing, that her role remained strictly professional, that the growing curiosity she felt toward him was simply a natural response to being pulled into an unfamiliar, intense world. But deep down, a small, quiet part of her recognized that something was shifting, slowly and carefully, in ways she wasn't ready to admit even to herself. Weeks turned into months, and Claire found herself settling into a strange new normal, one where danger and comfort existed side by side in ways she never could have predicted. She still worked her regular shifts at the clinic during the day, treating ordinary patients with ordinary problems, colds, sprains, small accidents that felt almost peaceful compared to the tension that filled Adrian's world. But several nights a week, a car would arrive outside her apartment, and she would step into a completely different life, one governed by unspoken rules and quiet, careful movements. She learned the names of the men who worked closest to Adrian, learned which ones trusted her, and which ones still watched her with suspicion. Marcus, the tall man who had first carried Adrian into the clinic, became something close to a friend, though their conversations remained careful, guarded, shaped by the world they both lived in. He never explained the details of what Adrian's organization actually did, and Claire never asked. She had learned quickly that certain silences were meant to be respected, not questioned. There was another man, however, who never seemed to warm to her presence. Nathaniel Gray, one of Adrian's most trusted lieutenants, watched her with a coldness that never softened, no matter how many months passed. He had been with Adrian for over a decade, long before Claire had ever entered the picture, and it was clear he resented the sudden trust Adrian placed in an outsider, someone who hadn't earned her place the way he believed he had. Claire noticed the tension whenever Nathaniel was in the room, the way his eyes followed her a little too closely, the way his voice carried a slight edge whenever he addressed her directly. She tried not to let it bother her, focusing instead on the reason she was there, keeping Adrian safe, healthy, and functioning despite the constant danger surrounding his life. But some nights, after leaving the estate, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Nathaniel's dislike for her ran deeper than simple professional jealousy. Adrian, for his part, seemed to trust her more with each passing week. He began sharing small pieces of himself with her during their quiet conversations, fragments of a childhood shaped by hardship, a family torn apart by circumstances he rarely spoke about in detail, a path into this life that had never truly felt like a choice at all. Claire listened without judgment, offering neither pity nor fear, simply the same steady presence she had shown him the very first night they met. One evening, after treating a small cut along his forearm, Claire found herself studying the faint scars scattered across his skin, evidence of a life lived constantly on the edge of danger. "Doesn't it ever get exhausting?" she asked quietly, "living like this every single day?" Adrian considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Exhausting isn't the right word," he said. "It's simply the only way I know how to survive. I inherited responsibilities I never asked for, and once you're inside this world, there's no clean way out. You either stay strong, or you disappear." Claire studied him carefully, seeing beyond the calm, controlled exterior he presented to everyone else. "That sounds lonely," she said softly. Adrian's eyes met hers, something raw and unguarded flickering behind them for just a moment before he masked it again. "It was," he admitted, "before." Neither of them said anything more, but the weight of that single word hung in the air between them, filled with an unspoken understanding neither was quite ready to acknowledge out loud. As their bond quietly deepened, so did the risks surrounding Claire's new role. She began noticing small warning signs she hadn't paid attention to before. Hushed conversations that stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room. Tense phone calls Adrian took in private. Extra guards stationed around the property during certain weeks. She understood, without needing to be told directly, that whatever conflicts existed in Adrian's world were growing more serious, more dangerous, with each passing month. One night, Adrian called her earlier than usual, his voice tighter than she had ever heard it. When she arrived at the estate, she found him pacing in his study, tension radiating from every movement. "There's been a shift," he said without preamble. "A group that used to respect the boundaries between us has decided those boundaries no longer matter. I need you to be more careful, more alert. If anything unusual happens, anything at all, I need you to trust the people around you and get to safety immediately." Claire felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "How dangerous is this?" she asked. Adrian hesitated before answering honestly. "More dangerous than anything you've seen since you started working with me," he admitted. "I should have kept you further away from this. I let myself believe I could protect you from the worst of it, and I was wrong to think that." Claire studied the tension etched into his face, the guilt hidden beneath his controlled exterior. "I made my choice," she said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, something complicated passing behind his eyes. "You should be afraid," he said quietly. "I am," Claire admitted, "but I trust you to protect the people around you, and I trust myself to handle whatever comes next." That trust would soon be tested in ways neither of them could have fully anticipated. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere within the estate grew increasingly tense. Meetings ran longer, security tightened further, and Claire noticed Nathaniel Gray growing more distant, more calculated in his interactions with everyone around him, including Adrian himself. She mentioned her concerns to Marcus one evening, carefully choosing her words. "Is everything all right with Nathaniel?" she asked. "He seems different lately, more withdrawn." Marcus's expression flickered with something Claire couldn't quite read. "Nathaniel has his own way of handling pressure," he said carefully. "Don't worry about him. Focus on Mr. Cole." But Claire couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled deep in her chest, a quiet instinct warning her that something beneath the surface of their world was shifting in ways that would soon become impossible to ignore. Despite the growing danger, Claire found herself unable to step away from the life she had built within Adrian's world. Her feelings for him had grown into something far more complicated than simple professional loyalty, though neither of them had spoken the truth out loud. She saw the way his expression softened whenever she entered a room, the way his guarded demeanor relaxed slightly in her presence, the quiet moments of connection that had grown between them despite every reason they had to keep their distance. One night, after a particularly tense meeting with several unfamiliar men, Adrian found her waiting in his study, worry etched across her face. "You shouldn't look so concerned," he said, attempting a small, tired smile as he entered the room. "I heard raised voices," Claire admitted. "I know something is wrong." Adrian sighed, running a hand through his hair as he sank into the chair across from her. "A rival group is testing boundaries," he explained, "trying to see how far they can push before I respond. It's a delicate situation, one that requires patience I don't particularly have right now." Claire studied him carefully, noticing the exhaustion behind his controlled exterior. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said quietly. Adrian looked at her, something vulnerable flickering behind his usually guarded eyes. "I've carried this weight since I was young enough that I barely remember a version of myself without it," he admitted. "I don't know how to do anything else." "Maybe you don't have to know how," Claire said gently. "Maybe you just have to let someone help carry it, even a little." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet tension between them filled with unspoken understanding. Adrian reached out slowly, his hand brushing against hers, a small, careful gesture that carried more weight than either of them was ready to admit. Claire didn't pull away. "This isn't part of our agreement," Adrian said softly, though his voice lacked any real conviction behind the words. "No," Claire agreed, "it isn't." Neither of them moved to change what was happening between them, the quiet acknowledgement of something neither had planned, but neither wanted to deny any longer. Whatever this was becoming, it existed entirely outside the careful boundaries Claire had set for herself, and yet, in that moment, she found she no longer wanted to hold on to those boundaries as tightly as she once had. Outside the walls of that quiet study, however, the danger surrounding them continued to grow, unseen and unspoken, moving closer with every passing day. Neither Claire nor Adrian could have predicted just how quickly that danger would arrive, or how close it would come to destroying everything they had carefully built together. The attack came on a night no one expected. Claire had arrived at the estate for a routine check on a minor injury Adrian had sustained days earlier, expecting the evening to pass as quietly as most others had in recent weeks. The guards at the gate seemed calm, the property looked undisturbed, and nothing about the atmosphere suggested the danger that was quietly closing in. She was in the study with Adrian, reviewing his recovery, when the first sound of shouting erupted from somewhere near the front of the house. Adrian's entire posture shifted instantly, years of instinct taking over as he rose to his feet, motioning for Claire to stay low and move away from the windows. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice sharp and controlled despite the chaos beginning to unfold outside. "Whatever happens, stay close." Claire's heart pounded as the sound of running footsteps echoed through the hallway outside the study. Marcus burst through the door moments later, his expression tense, his usual calm demeanor replaced by urgent focus. "They got past the outer gate," Marcus said quickly. "We need to move now." Adrian nodded, grabbing Claire's hand and pulling her toward a hidden passage behind one of the bookshelves, a precaution she hadn't even known existed until that very moment. As they moved through the narrow corridor, the sound of chaos grew louder behind them, shouting, running, the unmistakable tension of a situation spiraling rapidly out of control. They emerged into a smaller hallway near the back of the house, where several more of Adrian's men were already gathering, weapons drawn, faces set with grim determination. Claire's mind raced, trying to process the sheer scale of what was happening. The realization that the quiet, careful world she had grown accustomed to had suddenly erupted into something far more dangerous than anything she had prepared herself for. "This way," Marcus said, guiding them toward a side exit that led out toward the gardens. But before they could reach it, a group of unfamiliar men appeared from the opposite direction, cutting off their path. Adrian pushed Claire behind him instinctively, positioning himself between her and the approaching threat. The air grew thick with tension, every second stretching painfully long as both sides sized each other up in the dim hallway light. What happened next unfolded in a blur, Adrian's men moving quickly to intercept the threat, shouting filling the corridor as chaos erupted around them. Claire pressed herself against the wall, her training kicking in despite her fear, her mind already calculating how she might help if someone was injured in the confrontation. In the middle of the confusion, Claire noticed something that made her blood run cold. Nathaniel Gray stood near the edge of the hallway, his expression unreadable as the chaos unfolded around him. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Claire saw something in his gaze that confirmed her worst suspicions, a flicker of calculation rather than surprise, as though he had known this attack was coming long before it arrived. She didn't have time to process the implications before Adrian pulled her further back, shielding her as the confrontation intensified. Shouts turned into a scramble of movement, and within moments, the attackers were pushed back, retreating as quickly as they had appeared, their plan clearly disrupted before it could fully unfold. When the chaos finally settled, the estate fell into an uneasy, tense quiet. Adrian immediately turned to Claire, reforming, checking her over with visible worry despite his own composed exterior. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "I'm fine," Claire said, though her hands were shaking. "But Adrian, I saw something." She quickly explained what she had witnessed, the strange calm on Nathaniel's face, the flicker of recognition rather than surprise. Adrian's expression darkened as he listened, the pieces of a troubling pattern clearly falling into place in his mind. "I need to speak with him," Adrian said, his voice low and controlled despite the anger simmering just beneath the surface. The confrontation between Adrian and Nathaniel took place later that same night, in a private room, away from the rest of the household. Claire wasn't present for the conversation, but she could hear the tension radiating from behind the closed doors, low voices rising occasionally into sharp, clipped exchanges. When Adrian finally emerged, his expression was heavier than Claire had ever seen it, a mixture of anger, betrayal, and quiet sadness etched into every line of his face. "He's been working with them," Adrian said quietly, sitting down heavily beside her. "For months, he never trusted you, never trusted the changes happening within this house, and he decided the best way to fix that was to remove the source of it." Claire felt a chill run through her at the realization of just how close they had come to disaster. "What happens now?" she asked carefully. "He's no longer welcome here," Adrian said simply, though the weight behind those words carried far more meaning than the sentence itself suggested. Loyalty, once broken, cannot be repaired, not in this world. The following days were tense and quiet, the entire household adjusting to the absence of someone who had been a fixture within Adrian's inner circle for over a decade. Claire noticed the change in atmosphere immediately, the way the remaining men seemed both relieved and unsettled by the sudden shift in their carefully balanced world. Adrian, too, seemed different in the aftermath, more guarded than before, more aware of the fragile nature of trust within his line of work. He spent long hours in his study, reviewing security measures, adjusting protocols, ensuring nothing similar could happen again without warning. Claire watched him carry the weight of betrayal with quiet determination, never allowing it to fully break through his composed exterior, though she could see the toll it was taking on him beneath the surface. One evening, as she checked on a minor injury he had sustained during the confrontation, she noticed him staring out the window, lost in thought, his usual sharp focus replaced by something more vulnerable. "You saved my life again," he said quietly, without turning to look at her. "If you hadn't noticed Nathaniel's expression, if you hadn't said something, I might not have realized the truth until it was far too late. You would have figured it out eventually," Claire said gently. "Perhaps," Adrian admitted, "but perhaps not in time." He turned to face her then, his expression open in a way she rarely saw. "I've spent my entire life building walls around myself, trusting almost no one, believing that vulnerability was simply another weakness waiting to be exploited. And yet here you are, someone who walked into my world by accident, who has done nothing but prove, time and time again, that trust doesn't always end in betrayal." Claire felt her chest tighten at the raw honesty in his words. "I never wanted any of this," she admitted. "The danger, the secrecy, none of it. But somehow, despite everything, I don't regret the choice that brought me here." Adrian studied her carefully, the distance between them shrinking with every passing moment. "I should let you go," he said quietly, though his voice carried little conviction. "This life will only bring you more danger, more moments like tonight, more risks that could easily cost you everything." "You've said that before," Claire replied softly, "and I've made my choice every time. I'm not asking you to protect me from a life I've already chosen to be part of." The tension between them shifted, deepening into something neither of them fully understood, but both recognized as undeniable. Adrian reached out, judgingly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face, his touch careful, deliberate, filled with a tenderness that felt entirely at odds with the dangerous world surrounding them. "You make it very difficult to keep the distance I promised myself I would maintain," he admitted quietly. "Then maybe it's time to stop trying," Claire whispered. Whatever unspoken understanding passed between them in that moment marked a turning point neither of them could easily undo. The danger surrounding their lives hadn't disappeared, and the betrayal they had just uncovered served as a stark reminder of just how fragile trust could be within Adrian's world. But despite the risks, despite every reason to pull back, Claire found herself drawn deeper into a connection she could no longer deny, one built not on convenience or circumstance, but on a foundation of trust forged through fire, fear, and an unshakable resolve to protect one another, no matter the cost. As the household slowly began to settle back into a fragile sense of normalcy, both Claire and Adrian understood, without needing to say it aloud, that the events of that night had changed something fundamental between them, something that would shape the difficult decisions still waiting for them both in the days ahead. In the weeks following Nathaniel's departure, life within the estate slowly found a new, more careful rhythm. The remaining members of Adrian's inner circle adjusted to the shift in leadership dynamics, and though tension still lingered in the air, a quiet sense of stability began to return. Claire found herself spending more time at the estate than ever before, no longer simply as a physician tending to occasional injuries, but as someone who had become an undeniable part of the fabric of that world, whether she had originally intended it or not. Her relationship with Adrian had shifted into something neither of them fully defined out loud, though everyone around them seemed to understand the change without needing an explanation. Marcus treated her with a new kind of warmth, occasionally offering small, knowing smiles whenever he caught the two of them sharing a quiet moment together. Even the household staff seemed to sense the shift, treating her with a level of familiarity and respect reserved for someone who belonged there, rather than someone simply passing through. But despite the growing closeness between them, Claire couldn't ignore the constant undercurrent of danger that continued to shape every part of Adrian's life. The confrontation with Nathaniel had exposed vulnerabilities within his organization that still needed to be addressed, and though immediate threats had been dealt with, the underlying tensions between rival groups remained far from resolved. One afternoon, as Claire reviewed medical supplies in the small private room set up specifically for her use within the estate, Adrian entered quietly, his expression more serious than usual. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, closing the door behind him. Claire set down the supplies she had been organizing, immediately sensing the shift in his tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing is wrong exactly," Adrian said carefully. "But I've been thinking about everything that's happened, about the risks you've taken, the danger you've been exposed to simply because of your connection to me." Claire felt a familiar tightness form in her chest, bracing herself for words she had heard before, another attempt to push her away for her own protection. "If you're about to tell me I should leave, I already know how that conversation ends," she said quietly. Adrian shook his head slowly. "That's not what I'm trying to say," he replied. "I'm offering you a choice, a real one this time. I can arrange for you to disappear completely, a new identity, enough resources to build an entirely different life, somewhere far away from all of this. No one would ever find you. You could finally be free of the danger that comes with knowing me." Claire studied him carefully, searching his expression for any sign of what he truly wanted her to choose. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. "For me to disappear?" "No," Adrian admitted, his voice softer now, stripped of its usual careful control. "It's the last thing I want, but I need you to understand exactly what staying means. This life will never be simple. It will never be entirely safe. There will always be threats, always be moments like the one we just survived, and I refuse to let you make that choice without fully understanding what you would be choosing." Claire crossed the room slowly, closing the distance between them until she stood directly in front of him. "I've understood the risks since the very first night I treated you," she said firmly. "I understood them when I agreed to work for you, when I chose to stay despite every warning sign along the way. I'm not asking you to protect me from a life I've already accepted. I'm asking you to trust that I know exactly what I'm choosing, and that I'm choosing you." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, the careful walls he had built around himself, finally lowering completely as he looked at her. "I don't deserve someone like you," he admitted quietly. "Not after everything I've done, everything this life has forced me to become." "That's not your decision to make," Claire replied gently. "It's mine, and I've made it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet understanding between them settling into something solid, something neither betrayal nor danger could easily shake loose. Adrian reached for her hand, holding it with a tenderness that felt entirely at odds with the powerful, controlled figure everyone else in his world knew him to be. "Then let's build something different," he said quietly. "Not the life either of us expected, but something worth protecting, together." Over the following months, Claire's role within Adrian's world continued to evolve, though she never lost sight of the boundaries she had originally set for herself. She remained his physician, tending to injuries and health concerns with the same steady professionalism she had shown from the very beginning. But she also became something more, a trusted presence within his inner circle, someone whose opinion carried weight, whose insight was valued during difficult decisions, whose quiet strength helped balance the intensity that surrounded Adrian's daily life. She continued working occasional shifts at the small downtown clinic, refusing to fully abandon the life she had built before everything changed. It was important to her, a reminder of who she had been before stepping into this new, complicated world, a connection to the ordinary rhythms of life that grounded her amid the chaos surrounding Adrian's responsibilities. Adrian, in turn, began to change as well, subtle shifts that those closest to him noticed, even if they never spoke of them directly. He grew slightly more patient in negotiations, slightly more willing to consider alternatives to conflict when possible, a shift Marcus attributed quietly to Claire's steady, grounding influence on a man who had spent most of his life surrounded by violence and mistrust. Their relationship wasn't without difficulty. There were nights when Adrian's responsibilities pulled him away unexpectedly, tense situations that left Claire waiting anxiously for news, uncertain whether he would return safely. There were moments when the weight of his world pressed down heavily enough that he withdrew into himself, distant and guarded even with her, old habits built from years of self-protection resurfacing despite his best efforts to change. But through it all, Claire remained steady, refusing to let fear or frustration push her away from the connection they had built. She learned to navigate the complicated balance between supporting him and maintaining her own sense of self, refusing to lose herself entirely within the demands of his world, even as she embraced the role she had chosen to play within it. Months later, during a quiet evening in Adrian's study, the same room where their relationship had first begun to shift into something deeper, Claire found herself reflecting on just how far she had come since that first chaotic night at the clinic. The frightened, uncertain nurse who had once trembled at the sight of armed men bursting through her doors had grown into someone stronger, someone capable of navigating a world most people would never survive, someone who had found unexpected purpose and connection in circumstances she never could have predicted. Adrian entered the room quietly, settling into the chair across from her with the same careful, controlled grace that had first caught her attention all those months ago. "You're thinking about something," he observed, studying her expression carefully. "Just remembering how we started," Claire admitted with a small smile. "It feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a different lifetime," Adrian agreed. "For both of us." Claire studied him carefully, noting the subtle changes in his demeanor since those early days. The way his guarded exterior had softened, at least in her presence, the way trust had slowly replaced the calculated caution that once defined every interaction between them. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Bringing me into this world?" Adrian considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret the danger you've faced because of me," he admitted. "I regret every moment you've had to spend afraid, because of choices I made long before you ever entered my life. But I don't regret you being here. I don't regret trusting you, or the way you've changed the way I see everything around me." Claire felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, a quiet confirmation of everything they had built together, despite the odds stacked against them from the very beginning. "I don't regret it either," she said softly. "Not the danger, not the uncertainty, none of it. Because it led me here, to this, to you." Adrian reached for her hand, holding it gently, the same careful tenderness present in every touch he offered her, a stark contrast to the controlled, powerful figure the rest of the world saw whenever they looked at him. "This life will never be simple," he said quietly. "There will always be challenges, always be risks. Neither of us can fully predict or control." "I know," Claire replied, "but we'll face them together. That's enough for me." Outside the walls of the estate, the world continued exactly as it always had, unaware of the quiet transformation that had taken place within one of its most dangerous, most carefully guarded households. Rival groups continued their careful dance of power, alliances shifted, and threats lingered on the horizon, waiting for their moment to resurface. But within the walls of that study, something steady and unshakable had taken root, a bond forged not through convenience or circumstance, but through fire, fear, and an unwavering choice to stand beside one another, no matter what challenges still lay ahead. Claire Bennett had walked into that clinic on an ordinary night, expecting nothing more than another routine shift. She never could have imagined that a single moment of courage, one decision to help a stranger despite the danger surrounding him, would completely reshape the entire course of her life. She had traded the predictable rhythms of her old existence for something far more complicated, far more dangerous, and yet, somehow, far more meaningful than anything she had known before. As she sat there with Adrian, their hands intertwined, the quiet strength of their connection settled deeply between them, Claire understood, with complete certainty, that whatever challenges still waited ahead, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because fate had forced her into this world, but because she had chosen it, deliberately and completely, every single step of the way. And in a world defined by danger, betrayal, and the constant threat of violence, that quiet, deliberate choice, made freely and without regret, became the one thing powerful enough to hold everything else steady.